Right, the clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day. Point of order. Sir Christopher.
Mr. Speaker, can you please clarify this position for me? As I understand it, our right honourable friend, the member for Thanet North, is likely to be able to take the chair later today during these proceedings. Can you confirm that he won't be able to take the chair until we have disposed of the first bill on the order paper, because he spoke in quite vehement terms on second reading in that debate?
Sir Christopher, sit down. Don't worry, I've got the point. You don't need to labour it. The answer is, anybody who takes this chair is completely neutral, independent. Like all honourable members, I have faith and I have the trust in anybody who sits in this chair. I cannot believe that some people question that. In the same way with the panel of chairs, we have faith and trust, and I know that you've got faith and trust and you wouldn't even want to proceed on that basis. Right, let us now begin to move.
Hunting trophies, import prohibition bill, not amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Before we go on to procedures, I remind members of the difference between report stage and third reading. The scope of the report stage is a debate about the amendments I've selected. The scope of the third reading debate to follow will be the whole bill as it stands after that stage. Members who wish to consider these points and then decide at which stage or stages they want to try and catch my eye, we will begin with new clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider all new clauses and amendments as on the selection paper. But just before I do come, I would just say it is also in the hands of the Honourable Member for Christchurch to get this bill through very quickly, so he has no worries. Sir Bill Wiggin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very good to see you in the chair. New clause 1, I'd like to move, which concerns the duration of this Act and would cause the provisions of the bill to cease to have effect 5 years after the Act has passed. Mr. Speaker, we stood on a manifesto commitment in 2019 to ban imports from trophy hunting of endangered animals. I therefore propose that the sunset clause be added for the very simple purpose of ensuring that should the Act prove unsuccessful in protecting endangered species, it can be withdrawn. If, on the other hand, after 5 years, this Act does in fact prove to be successful in achieving the stated aim in our manifesto commitment, the Secretary of State would have the power to extend the expiration date by up to 5 years. I have been concerned throughout the progress of this bill, however, that it is not motivated by a desire to see African wildlife flourish and prosper. If it were, then it would have paid heed to the scientific evidence provided by experts in conservation. British conservationists Professor Amy Dickman and Adam Hart have argued that 90% of protected areas with lions are severely underfunded. Removing trophy hunting without providing a suitable alternative of revenue will expose those underfunded protected areas to further risks such as poaching. According to the IUCN Red List, trophy hunting is not considered to be a threat driving any species to extinction. Instead, trophy hunting generates revenue for anti-poaching and habitat conservation. It has been recognised as a tool, a positive tool for conservation in multiple species, including black rhino, white rhino, agali, macaw and some populations of lion, while white-tailed deer, as well as maintaining extensive areas of wildlife habitat. In a joint letter from High Commissioners of Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania and Zimbabwe to the Minister of State in the Foreign Office, they argue well-managed trophy hunting, the prevailing model in all our countries, contributes to reductions in habitat loss and poaching. It has proved as a demonstrable conservation tool for multiple species, including endangered ones such as black rhinos. Maxi Louis, the director of NASCO, the Namibian Association of CBRM, which is Community Renewable Support Organisations, in a letter to the Honourable Member for Crawley wrote, "Take away those employed to protect wildlife in the reserves and poachers move into the vacuum. This quickly leads to huge losses of endangered animals, yet what really angers us is how these animals die. Snaring leads to appalling injuries and pitifully slow deaths. Poisoning is traumatic, lions vomiting for hours as they pass away. She wrote that when Botswana had a temporary ban on paid hunting, there was a 593% increase in fresh elephant carcasses being found. Professor Amy Dickman, a conservation biologist and Director of Wildlife Conservation Research at the University of Oxford, has also argued that this bill will facilitate an increase in poaching. She's described her distress while carrying out fieldwork in Africa, where she witnessed the horrendous aftermath of a lioness trapped in a poacher's snare, a decapitated hyena, and a leopard with its paw mangled in a trap, all of which had suffered more painful and prolonged deaths from poachers than from a hunter's bullet. The concern held by both conservationists and African community leaders is that in forcing the removal of the vital source of revenue supplied by trophy hunters to these communities, we open the floodgates to poachers who will cause far more cruelty and pain to the animals and will pose a far greater threat to endangered species. The opinions and evidence from these experts do not fill me with a lot of confidence that the bill will achieve its stated aim, nor does the amount of misinformation that is being touted by the campaign to ban trophy hunting. So I've introduced this clause to ensure that this bill is not a classic case of virtue signalling at the expense of African wildlife and the conservation efforts of African people. In 5 years down the line, the Act proves to be ineffective, as I suspect it will, at conserving endangered species and has led to an increase in poaching, then it seems right to me that provision should be made for the Act to be withdrawn. If the supporters of this bill are so confident that this Act will achieve the desired result of protecting endangered species and not encouraging the poachers, who I believe are a greater threat to these endangered species than well-regulated hunting, then why not include this sunset clause in the bill? I will give 5 course.
Can I ask my good friend, an honourable friend, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I ask him how much in percentage terms does trophy hunting provide to give the protectors of wildlife an income, the budget? How much of the budget comes from trophy hunting?
All of it. Because one of the problems I will come to in a moment is that where we are asking people to stop trophy hunting, we're not necessarily replacing that with funding. And in one area, which I'm looking forward to telling the House about in a moment, we do provide funding, but we're trying to encourage local people to protect their wildlife and build businesses, particularly for the women. And then they are arguing that by withdrawing trophy hunting, we are cutting the legs off that effort. So there are real contradictions here, and that's why it's such a difficult subject.
Well, my honourable friend,
I will, of course.
I'm very grateful. Can he confirm that Vernon Booth, a conservationist and wildlife consultant in Zimbabwe, writing in today's Daily Mail, has said that revenue from trophy hunting contributes 25% of the income of the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority?
Yes, I have no reason to disagree with that, and I think that it just demonstrates what a thorny issue this is. And it's worth remembering that this is a bill designed to stop the importing of trophies rather than prevent the banning of hunting, which is why I'd like to speak to new clause 2 regarding the implementation and monitoring, which is similar to new clause 1 in that its intention is to assess the practicality and effectiveness of the provisions of this Act. It would require a statement, it would be a requirement that within 3 years of the Act being passed, the Secretary of State must lay before Parliament a report on its implementation and the effectiveness of its provisions, including an impact assessment that the Act has had on the conservation of endangered species. As the UK is a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, we should follow its recommendations before restricting trophy hunting. These include a sound analysis of the conservation role of trophy hunting, meaning consultation with effective governments and communities, steps to address poor practice, and implementation of feasible, fully funded alternatives, which generate equal or greater conservation benefits. Since I don't believe that these steps have been adequately taken, it's only right that this proposed amendment is adopted to ensure the effectiveness of the Act in promoting conservation of endangered species in measured 3 years, which is measured in 3 years after the implementation of the Act. I can see no reason, if there's such confidence in the Act, that it will contribute to the conservation of such species, for there to be any objection. to a post-implementation review being undertaken, which examines the impact on species abroad. In order to test the efficacy of the legislation and whether it's achieved the desired goal of improving the population numbers of endangered species, I hope that the House will consider this new clause, which would ensure we continue to keep the effectiveness of the bill under review until it's enacted. New clause 3 is a reporting requirement for the Secretary of State to assess the impact of provisions on Northern Ireland, which is put forward by my honourable friend, who I have to say has been a tremendous ally in this. And if I were to occupy a foxhole, perhaps in Ukraine, I could ask for no finer colleague to join me than he. So I want to thank my honourable friend for tabling. Section 3 of the bill makes it clear that though the bill extends to Northern Ireland, it does not actually apply there. And I wonder if my right honourable friend therefore agree with me that considering the delicate nature of the Northern Ireland Protocol, requiring the Secretary of State to provide the House with as much information as possible on the impact of the bill on imports, then this would be a sensible measure. I'm also grateful to my right honourable friend for tabling new clause 4, which seeks to introduce an advisory board on trophy hunting. And I think this is a really helpful step forward. And I'm glad that we've had productive talks with the government on this and that they recognise that this would be a sensible inclusion in the bill. In principle, I support the introduction of the advisory board, whose role would be to advise the Secretary of State on matters relating to the import of hunting trophies to Great Britain. If the aim of the bill was to prevent the hunting of endangered animals, then expert advice on hunting trophies that have been derived from a species of animal which appear to be or even likely to become endangered is very welcome. In my opinion, it's vital that we keep the focus on endangered species at the heart of this bill, since that is, after all, the aim. Much of the information that has been presented at second reading of this bill has been analysed by Dr. Dilys Rowe and Professor Adam Hart. They have found that out of over 150 statements made by MPs in support of the ban, 70% were factually incorrect or misleading. Likewise, much of the public campaigning and lobbying that has been done by high-profile actors and celebrities who actually have very little expertise in this matter. I'd be delighted to give way.
I thank him for giving way. Thank you. I think some of the statistics that certainly I've been sent around this bill have been obviously produced from a very biased, on both sides of a biased, and is that not the case? We shouldn't pander to a table that we've been sent that's obviously from a hunting lobby or it's come from an animal. We need to get somewhere sensible in the middle where we're considering, and a lot of the honourable gentleman's points are obviously using the statistics from one side, but dismissing those of the other.
Well, I haven't used very many statistics, Mr. Speaker, to be fair, because I fully agree with my honourable friend. This was analysis done on statements made by myself included in the debate before, and if 70% were factually incorrect or misleading, then who judges that? Well, obviously, the people to judge it are experts, and the experts should be peer-reviewed, acknowledged and acceptable to everybody. And that's why this one amendment, which I think is very, very important, allows the government to have access to agreed experts, which I think will be much more helpful, much more factually useful, and will take perhaps some of the emotion out of what is a very, very emotional subject. Because I think... Yes, of course I will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we're all united in this House in trying to protect endangered African wildlife, and I myself have been seen a lot of it out in the wild, and I absolutely applaud those efforts. What there is clearly a disagreement about is the best way to do that, and indeed all these statistics which there's debate about, and I've got lots of statistics which I won't bother quoting because no one will believe it. My simple question really is this, that if your argument is that you need trophy hunting to continue to provide funding for conservation efforts, if that is the only reason to allow the continued trophy hunting, then shouldn't really the pressure be put on this government, but also internationally, to ensure there are other routes of funding to ensure conservation efforts? Because it surely cannot be right that actually the main way to fund conservation of endangered species is to allow the killing of endangered species.
I'm very grateful. I'm mindful that new clause 4 doesn't stray beyond what New Clause 4 does, which is to try and get a team of experts to advise the government so that his point, which I think is very valid, is part of that calculation by the Secretary of State. Because public campaigning and lobbying done by high-profile actors and celebrities who have very little experience in these matters, but whose voices seem to speak louder due to their fame than due to the African community leaders and scientific experts who have objected to the bill. And I think we need to take away the heat and the anger from this and get back to the expertise, the science, and the results that, as he rightly says, the whole House wants, which is that we protect endangered species. So I think it's only right that if this bill receives royal assent, then the government should have to consult with experts in conservation to ensure that the aim of the legislation is respected. I'd be most grateful to the Minister if she could provide some assurance to African community leaders who have objected to this bill in their letters to the government that their expertise on this matter is respected and incorporated into such an advisory board. This would ensure a positive consultation is maintained with the countries most affected by this bill, namely in Africa, who have thus so far taken offence from MPs telling their democratic countries how to manage their wildlife without listening to what they have to say. I wholeheartedly support the introduction of this clause into the bill to ensure an ongoing and productive consultation is had between the government and the people who will be on the receiving end, as my honourable friend mentioned, of the effects of this bill. I'll be delighted to.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, but profess myself to be a little confused by the argument he makes about us seeking to undermine the role of African leaders. My understanding of the proposed bill is a ban on imports here, not a ban on trophy hunting in those countries, but a ban in this country on imports. Is that not the case?
Yeah. I absolutely agree with his understanding. Unfortunately, it isn't quite as straightforward as that. The purpose of the bill reaches beyond what the UK imports and exports, because we already have a permitting system that allows us to manage that. So this is more than that. This is a proper ban, and therefore the people who are expected to be on the receiving end are the people who would benefit from New Clause 4 being added to the bill, which would give some opportunity for them to consult. Amendment number 6 aims to limit the ban on trophies that are in breach of CITES permit requirements. Amendment 12, and I'm again grateful to my friend, the Honourable Gentleman, Member for Christchurch, for tabling Amendment 12, which exempts the countries of Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe from the ban based on their records of conservation. I will try and make some progress because I believe that the government has been exceptionally helpful on this, and therefore I think the amendment that most matters is amendment number 1. So if I can just get to that part of my notes, I will seek to enlighten the House as to why. I'll be delighted to give way while I'm shuffling my papers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a happy St. Patrick's Day to you. I was reflecting that perhaps the animals that are being hunted as trophies are not the only endangered species around here. I think there are several of them on the government benches as well, in the shape of Conservative members of Parliament. But I hope he recognises, and I think it's unfair to suggest otherwise, that many of our constituents do feel very passionately about this, that the scope of the bill is, as the other honourable member has just said, limited to bringing these trophies into the United Kingdom. No one's trying to tell sovereign governments what they should be doing in their own countries, but we should take cognizance of what is being brought into this country. And many of the constituents in Glasgow North that I have heard from are extremely concerned about the trade, the practice of trophy hunting and the trade in such trophies. And I think it's important that we recognise that strength of feeling. And it's good that he's bringing these amendments in a constructive manner, because I think the last thing constituents would want to see is parliamentary game playing and undermining of the private members' bill system.
Well, I'm typically grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his very helpful intervention, which allowed me to shuffle my papers. And I agree with him. I think the people who are concerned by this bill are kind-hearted, They want to make sure that animals are safe and protected, and they've got a very good vehicle in my honourable friend, the member for Crawley's bill, to express that. The problem with the road to hell is that it is paved with good intentions. And what none of us, I think, in the whole House want to see is any reduction in the habitat and the success of endangered species in their recovery. And therefore, this bill, I hope, will not achieve my fears, which is that it would undermine that successful route, but instead we can come together, agree a bill that allows this to pass through the House, and to that end, Amendment 1 is the one which I think is most important, because Amendment 1 seeks to restrain the Secretary of State, because I know this one's tremendous, but I can't predict who it might be in the future, and therefore it would restrict the Secretary of State to the species listed on the face of the bill, the ones that we are all concerned about. So it would remove the power of the Secretary of State to vary by statutory instrument the species to which this Act applies. It would close the loophole that grants the Secretary of State the power to extend the Act to animals which are not considered endangered. And I'm concerned that this power could go beyond our 2019 manifesto commitment that promised to ban the import of hunting trophies from endangered animals, something that our constituents did vote for. So I thank the government for engaging with me so positively on this, and I believe that we can move forward constructively if we adopt this amendment. It would keep the scope of the bill to species listed in Annex A or B of the Principal Wildlife Trade Regulation. Under the Principal Wildlife Trade Regulation, all CITES species are listed in 4 annexes according to their varying levels of protection. Annex A of the Principal Wildlife Trade Regulation, which includes all CITES Appendix 1 species and some CITES Appendix 2 species, lists the most endangered species, those which are either threatened with extinction or so rare that any level of trade would imperil the survival of the species. This includes the hunting leopard, the Indian lion, black and white rhino, apart from those in South Africa where numbers are higher. Annex B includes all other CITES Appendix 2 species, as well as some other species, but predominantly species threatened by commercial trade. For instance, the African elephant, the African lion, some white rhinos, some brown bears, and the American black bear would fall into this classification. Granting the Secretary of State power to vary by statutory instrument the species to which this Act applies would allow species that are not listed in CITES and are not endangered to fall within the scope of the bill. In fact, this was brought to my attention in the conclusions of the second reading debate when the Minister said the government intends to table instruments that would cover species of concern, and that would cover other animals, which really disturbed me. The British people did not vote for an indiscriminate ban on shooting any animal that the Secretary of State might choose to name. They voted to protect endangered species, and that's what I hope this bill will do. I don't think, Mr. Speaker, I need to go on. If the government is willing to accept Amendment 1, I think I can pause and allow some of my friends and colleagues to contribute. If the Minister would like to intervene, I'd be delighted to know if the Amendment 1 is acceptable to the government. Otherwise, we can talk about Amendment 14, which leaves out the power of the Secretary of State to specify animals or species to which the prohibition applies, but of course that very much does a similar job to Amendment 1. Amendment 23, I give way happily.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I would like to confirm that the government is minded to accept both New Clause 4 and Amendment 1 for reasons I will go into later during this debate, but I'm pleased to understand, I think, that the remaining 30 amendments put forward will not be moved by the honourable gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful to my friend the Minister. I think she's been about as helpful as any Minister I've ever had the pleasure of working with, and I'm sure the whole House will join me in celebrating my ability to withdraw my amendments, apart from the 2 that she's just mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Clark. Who's going to read it? Are you moving it or not?
No, he's withdrawing.
Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear you.
New clause 1, duration of this Act.
Not moved.
Well, in that case, right. He's moving it to 4. The new clause 4, advisory board on hunting trophies.
Beg to move.
Question is to be read a second time.
Question is that the bill be now read a second time. And before I just bring in, just to clarify something that was said, and it's purely clarification, the bill is only limited to the UK. That's what's being asked for. So those who think it was wider, just for the clarification and purely clarification, it would only affect this country and not other countries. Right, we now come to new clause 4. Mr. Christopher Chope to move formally.
Formally.
There we are. The question is, the new clause 4 be read a second time? As many of that opinion say aye. Oh, we're having a debate, Sir Henry, aren't we? Or Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much indeed. It is a privilege to be able to rise in this debate and respond to the clauses and amendments that my right honourable friends, the members for North Hereford and Christchurch have proposed today. I'm very grateful for the constructive way in which the government and my right honourable friends have been in consultation on these amendments and new clauses. And I, Mr. Speaker, am happy to accept new clause 4, the establishment of an advisory board on how a trophy hunting import ban operates when it is law, and indeed Amendment 1, which would allow discretion for the Secretary of State to add species. I think that actually new clause 4, an advisory board, covers off a lot of the concerns that my right honourable friend, the member for North Hereford, has set out. I'm in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, and I trust that across this House we want to see the best conservation of endangered species around the world, whether that be in Africa or anywhere else, North America, other parts of Asia, other parts of the world as well, because this bill is not just about the importation, the banning of endangered species body parts into this country from Africa, but from endangered species from around the world. I note that my right honourable friend has withdrawn the amendments in terms of the sunset clause on monitoring, on how it would work with regard to Northern Ireland. And again, I think new clause 4, an advisory board, actually covers off a lot of those concerns. So, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to support those new clauses and amendments and welcome the fact that the government have helped me in working constructively. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm glad that the member has mentioned the issue of Northern Ireland, and perhaps, because I'd raised this at committee stage, with the EU law applying in Northern Ireland, of course, the importation of trophies could come through Northern Ireland, Irish Republic into Northern Ireland, and then across from Northern Ireland into GB, a kind of a backdoor way of circumventing the important provisions of this bill. What assurances has he had that that back door can be firmly locked so that trophies cannot come into Northern Ireland and through Northern Ireland into the rest of the United Kingdom?
Grateful to that intervention. I think the response to that in detail needs to come from a Minister of the Crown and not a simple backwoodsman, backbencher in this House. But I have had assurances from members of the government that the Northern Ireland situation will not become some sort of backdoor or some sort of stepping stone for endangered species to be able to be introduced into Great Britain through some sort of Northern Ireland route. The protocol, the Windsor Agreement, subject to agreement, of course, in this House next week, and the United Kingdom Internal Market Act should cover off any of those concerns, but of course I defer to my honourable friend, the Minister, who no doubt will be addressing those concerns in a moment. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, I'm happy to support new clause 4 and Amendment 1. I'm grateful for those other, I think, 30 amendments and new clauses being withdrawn, and I hope that we can move on to ensuring that this legislation to protect the most endangered species in the world, and Britain playing its full part in doing that, can proceed to its next phases, both here today and later on in the other place. Thank you.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for saying that he supports new clause 4. The background to this has been explained, that there are diametrically opposed expert opinions on what would be a good hunting ban of trophies and what would not be. And I think it's important that this debate should be informed by the facts and the science. And to that extent, I hope that by accepting new clause 4, we will give some solace to, for example, Dr. Dilys Rowe, the chair of the IUCN Sustainable Use and Livelihoods Specialist Group, and Professor Adam Hart, who's a member of that specialist group, who wrote on the 22nd of February to both my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, but also to the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, setting out their concerns about the bill and the risk that the United Kingdom government might be taking of ignoring the scientific evidence and thereby actively harming conservation globally. And they said that it's now, for the sake of wildlife all over the world, now is the time to listen to quieter, more informed voices. And I think that by setting up such an advisory panel, that will be facilitated. And I'm delighted that the government has indicated that it is going to support that. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's agreement about the objectives, but there is no agreement about the means by which those objectives should be achieved. The objective being to protect endangered species and actually to encourage the revival of those species. And that's why I think that we've made a lot of progress today. But can I also draw attention to my new clause 3? I've made it clear that I'm not going to force this to a vote. But new clause 3 deals with the problem that this bill fails to deliver in full on the Conservative Party manifesto commitment, because that commitment was to ban the import of hunting trophies from endangered animals into the United Kingdom. My honourable friend's bill, the long title, makes it clear that it's only limited to making provision prohibiting the import of hunting trophies into Great Britain. And Northern Ireland is excluded from its scope, and that's prevented me tabling amendments to extend the bill to the whole of the United Kingdom. But this aspect of the debate featured in a report on page 14 of yesterday's Daily Telegraph, and a commentary by Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who was asking about what is the point in election manifestos if MPs don't vote for what's in it. Eduardo Conchalves, founder of the campaign to ban trophy hunting, is quoted as saying that they are aware of groups from Northern Ireland who are shooting threatened species and are bringing their heads and bodies back home. He says, and I quote, "This needs to be stopped. Exiting the EU made it possible for the UK to introduce world-beating legislation to ban hunting trophies. It would be a travesty if the bill were not to apply to the whole of the United Kingdom because of unfinished business with Brexit." It's a pity, Madam Deputy Speaker, that if Mr Conchalves felt so strongly about this, that he didn't actually criticise the limiting long title of the bill when it was first introduced on the 15th of June last year. He is, however, correct to highlight that under the Northern Ireland Protocol and the proposed Windsor Framework, the European Union single market rules will still apply in Northern Ireland, raising fears that Northern Ireland could become, indeed, a backdoor to get the trophies to rich clients in Britain and dodge the ban. He says that hunting trophies could be stopped from entering Northern Ireland overnight with a stroke of a pen. The Secretary of State would only need to issue a ministerial decree stating that he or she will no longer sign import permits. I'd be interested, Madam Deputy Speaker, to hear from my honourable or right honourable friends from the department what they think about that suggestion. If correct, it could also surely apply to the whole of the United Kingdom, thereby making the need for this legislation totally redundant. But can I ask the Minister specifically to comment on the assertion that France and the Netherlands have used ministerial decrees to ban trophies because single market rules prevented them legislating? Is that correct? Is it also correct that Belgium and Finland are considering doing the same? And would it be possible for the United Kingdom to do likewise? We don't normally try to legislate by decree, although I noticed that the President of France is trying to do just that in his own country at the moment. But so I'm a bit sceptical about what can be done to deal with the problem raised in the fact that this does not apply to the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's why I put forward new clause 3, which would have actually required the government to report on the implications of what was happening in Northern Ireland, so that in due course it would be properly informed as to whether or not legislative action was needed to address any loopholes or anti-avoidance. And so I'm disappointed the government's not prepared to accept new clause 3, but I conclude by asking, putting the challenge to the government: what solution does the Minister have to the Daily Telegraph headline, open inverted commas, Brexit loophole allows import of hippo heads and stuffed tigers? Because I do think quite a lot of people will be wanting to have a clear answer to that question, and I don't think it's forthcoming with this bill, which applies only to Great Britain and not to Northern Ireland. I won't go into all the other amendments that I've put down, but I do think that what the compromise, in the sense which is what it is, that is now emerging, should be of some help to our friends in those 6 African countries who have expressed outrage in their letter to the government about the implications of this bill for those countries. We make much in this House of the importance of soft power, and I think that we need to start thinking more about what we can do to engage positively those countries in Africa that actually abstained in the recent United Nations General Assembly vote calling for Russia's immediate withdrawal from Ukraine. And Angola, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Uganda, we need, Madam Deputy Speaker, in my view, to work much more closely and positively with the governments in those countries, instead of letting them think that they are alienated and are viewed by us as being subject to sort of colonial control, which is the essence of the complaint that was being made to both the Minister of State at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, who's dealing with development, but also to the Foreign Secretary. So let's see if we can work with those countries, listen to, try and understand them, and then we might find it easier to prevent them falling into the hands of the China and Soviet influence, which they seem to be tempted to do at the moment because they are being neglected. So I think that this compromise has great potential for improving foreign relations between our country and those countries in southern Africa, based upon a better understanding of the need to protect wildlife, but also to do so in a sustainable way that fits in with the local economies. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is in a sense an historic day for me because it looks as though the government's going to accept one of my amendments. I don't think I'm going to say anything else in case they change their mind.
Minister Trudy House.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks to all colleagues who are both here in the debate in the House speaking today, but also colleagues who have played their part in making this possible. And in particular, I want to pay particular thanks to the Honourable Member for Crawley, who has demonstrated such diligence, professionalism and courage, because there are strong and credible arguments across this debate. But to speak to NC4 and Amendment 1, I shall be brief, Madam Deputy Speaker, because we have an awful lot to get through. As I have previously said, I support both in turn. New Clause 4, tabled by the Honourable Member for Christchurch. I must commend the principle of receiving expert advice on this matter, especially given the credible and variable discussions, and absolutely in recognition that in some cases money does come from trophy hunting, which supports conservation. That is not in all cases. And I would like to set out very briefly what more we are currently doing and how we will continue to support those countries later in my third reading speech. In terms of Amendment 1, tabled by the Honourable Member for North Herefordshire, I also support this amendment. In doing so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to stress my support for the internationally agreed system under CITES for identifying, listing and protecting species that are endangered, threatened or potentially at risk from international trade, including the trade of hunting trophies. That is why the reference to Annex A and B covers thousands of species, around 6,000 species. Among them, those iconic species we know are targeted for trophies. Of course, with this ban, we go beyond CITES, and that is the right thing to do, and it's why we are here.
The question is that new Clause 4 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that new Clause 4 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 1, Sir Bill Wiggin to move formally.
Like to move formally.
The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Consideration completed. Third reading what day?
Now.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Henry Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the Hunting Trophies Import Prohibition Bill be now read a third time. I am extraordinarily grateful to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and all honourable and right honourable members here today who have been present to ensure that we are supporting the conservation of some of the world's most endangered species. Not only from Africa, some of those iconic species like lion and giraffe and rhinoceroses, but also other parts of the world, polar bears in North America as well. To be clear, the territorial extent of this bill is Great Britain. It is about not allowing the importation of hunted body parts of endangered species. I'd be delighted to.
As you know, I'm a supporter of the bill, and this is great news that this bill is going through this House today with so much support within in the House. The point he's just touched on is absolutely critical. There's been a lot of false information out. This is about our territorial rules. It's not telling other countries what to do. This is not colonial. This is actually saying this is what we will allow into our country. It's entirely up to other countries what they want to do. But this is about us and this House.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his intervention, and he anticipates some of the remarks that I was about to say. This is about the values that we in Britain have, that we do not want to be part of a trade in endangered species body parts. We are not telling other countries how to run their trade or their conservation or hunting policies, although we may have a range of personal opinions on this, and it's important to remember that this is about those CITES appendices 1 and 2 species, some almost 6,000 species of fauna and flora who are endangered, that this legislation, hopefully when enacted, Madam Deputy Speaker, can play a part in conserving. I'd be delighted to give way.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's been very generous in allowing amendments to this bill. Has he received any assurances from the honourable members for Christchurch or North Herefordshire that, as he's now accepted the amendments, they will not divide on third reading? As he knows, I support this bill, and I hope it goes through without a division.
I sincerely hope that is the case, and right on cue.
I'm sure I can... But I love the way the House is listening rather carefully to this. Yes, I can confirm that there is no need to divide the House. This is a manifesto commitment. We are fulfilling it. We've improved the bill, and I'm tremendously grateful to the government for their help with that.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend from North Herefordshire for that contribution. He is right. This is a manifesto commitment. Indeed, this is a commitment that all major parties in this House have signed up to, and I think that is a very important point to stress. And I sincerely hope that the other place will hear what this elected House has said with regard to this legislation. I'll be honest, give way.
And I want to congratulate him on the work he's done to get this bill thus far, and I hope it gets through today. Could we just, perhaps he could join the rest of us in congratulating all those many campaigners all around the country that have worked so hard to draw attention to the issue of trophy hunting and ensure that we've got such a good attendance here today, and that in itself becomes an education to people to understand that we can play our part in conservation of beautiful and endangered species by passing this bill today.
I'm grateful to the contribution by the Right Honourable Member from Islington. He is absolutely right. People in this country, by a clear majority, opinion polling shows between 80 and 90% of people want to see this legislation come through. The people of this country care passionately about conservation and the environment and protecting endangered species. And it has been a long campaign of many people from many different backgrounds to ensure that this legislation has come before Parliament. And it just would like to reiterate the point that I hope that will be heard across Central Lobby in the other place when this legislation hopefully leaves this House later on this morning and goes to them for consideration, because time is of the essence to help protect endangered species. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are many excellent pieces of private members' legislation before this House today, and I don't want to take any more time in delaying that. So I am grateful to all of those who have supported this legislation and just in time.
Timing is everything in life, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my honourable friend join me in commending Eduardo Concalves for funding the campaign to ban trophy hunting and revealing the sordid word of sordid world of killing sentient animals for entertainment, there is massive support in my Neath constituency, and I congratulate him on bringing forward this bill.
Well, I'm grateful for that message of congratulations and indeed to highlight Eduardo for the campaign efforts that he has led for so many years to achieve this conservation effort. I would be delighted to give way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick point. I'm quite sure I find it distasteful to have heads on walls, to be honest. But those heads that are already on walls or rugs that are already there, they're not affected by this bill at all.
This legislation takes effect from when it is passed and receives royal assent. It is not retrospective in that sense. So with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time. Thank you.
Well done. Question is that the bill be now read the third time. Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do wish to be very short on this, make a short speech. First of all, I want to say that my party is totally committed to this bill. And in fact, I was pleased to be a sponsor of the bill and pleased to have served on the committee. The one disappointment that I do have is that because of the existing arrangements which the government has with the EU, where past EU law and future EU law will apply to Northern Ireland, where Northern Ireland remains part of the EU single market, that this bill cannot apply to Northern Ireland. So first of all, those who wish to go trophy hunting and reside in Northern Ireland can bring their trophies back. And I think that that's to be part of the United Kingdom, but yet to find that a law which is supported by over 86% of the UK population cannot apply in one part of the United Kingdom is an offence. It's offensive to me, and it's offensive to many of the constituents who wrote to me asking me to support this legislation. The second thing, it's a danger, because if, as a result of Northern Ireland remaining part of the EU single market and EU law still applying there, so that UK law cannot apply in part of the United Kingdom. That's the stark reality that we're facing here. That Northern Ireland then could become a backdoor for those who wish to circumvent this legislation. People could bring their trophies into Northern Ireland, and because there's frictionless trade from Northern Ireland to GB, could take them in. And I would like to hear from the Minister. I understand that the sponsor of the bill was not able to give the answer, because this is something which perhaps the Minister should have been addressing. It was raised at the committee stage. And I would like to have an assurance. My preference, of course, is that Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom is fully restored. Not something which is done by the protocol, not something which is done by the Windsor Framework either, but that's my preference. But in the absence of that, I would like to hear from the Minister what steps she intends to take to ensure that this very important, well-supported, worthwhile legislation is not circumvented by the fact that we have left part of the United Kingdom half in the European Union.
Anthony Brown.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to put on record my strong support for this bill. As a former environmental observer and of the Times, I've written a lot about conservation of African endangered species, and also as a private individual I've seen them a lot in the wild. And I can absolutely confirm that the charismatic megafauna of Africa is one of the true glories of our planet, and conserving them, the endangered species there, is one of the greatest challenges we face as a planet. Now, whatever the arguments about trophy hunting, whether it provides money for conservation or not, it surely cannot be right that protecting these endangered species relies on allowing rich people to kill them. It is not a long-term sustainable solution, and I really urge the government going forwards to do all that it can to make sure that both the UK and internationally ensures that conservation efforts across African countries and other areas where there are endangered animals are properly funded without having to rely on rich people killing endangered animals. Thank you.
Margaret Ferry.
Deputy Speaker, I'm very pleased to see this bill return to the Chamber for its final Commons hurdle.
The Honourable Member for Crawley has done an outstanding job and has been a dedicated advocate for the cause. I'd like to thank organisations and individuals for their continued work in the campaign to see this bill pass and the briefings that they have provided. I have been disappointed to see the persistent lobbying from certain interest groups against this legislation, often intentionally based on misinformation and hiding behind the transparent and false veil of conservation. The misrepresentation of those purporting to be conservationists is something I spoke to in some detail at second reading, and I don't wish to repeat myself here today. What I will say, though, is that it does not take much scratching at the surface to see that what many of these lobbyists are looking for is the conservation of hunting for sport rather than anything environmental. And when you look at who is funding their deeply biased works, that will become all clearer. At second reading, I argued that trophy hunting is an ugly relic of the colonial era. What I would add to that today is that as trophy hunting and poaching is in fact illegal for locals in these countries, it is ironic that those looking to protect the highly profitable Western white trophy hunting tourist industry might find themselves under the spotlight of that very same colonial accusation. And to this point, I'd like to pay tribute to a man who knows firsthand the positive impact of hunting bans to protect his country's beautiful wildlife, former President of Botswana, Ian Khama. And he urged colleagues today to support this bill, in his words, to halt the reckless, cruel destruction of the world's wonderful wildlife by nature's enemies. I would further add that the UK government, and more importantly the UK public, have every right to decide that they don't want these macabre, mangled animal body parts entering the country or circulating here for profit. And this is what the bill ultimately will achieve. And as we have heard, it doesn't change the law in other countries or outlaw hunting there. Polling has shown unequivocally that the British public, including many of my constituents, support an outright ban on trophy imports and do not support proposals for any partial ban or smart bans. In 2020, the government consulted on banning the import of hunting trophies, and its subsequent policy statement said, within the consultation, we asked whether exemptions should be considered, for example, for conservation reasons. We note the strength of sentiment from those who did not support exemptions, and there will be no exemptions for hunting trophies from species in scope of the ban. So it's clear that some of the exemptions that some members were trying to include in this bill were not in keeping with public feeling, the public feeling the government were able to test through public consultation. So it's also clear that including any exemptions to a ban would undermine the very purpose of the legislation. Where we allow loopholes to exist, we also allow people to find ways to exploit them. I think it's fair to say that participants of this sport come from one main demographic, and that's rich white men and sometimes rich white women. And it's that same demographic the proceeds benefit, looking to protect their financial interests at the cost of the existence of some of the world's most beautiful animals, the conservation of natural resources and wildlife in Africa and its communities. I urge all colleagues from across both benches to throw their full support behind the Honourable Member for Crawley and his bill. It's critical and overdue change for the better.
Yes, if you all could stand who are trying to catch my eye. That it was a bit confusing last time, it's only one person. Sir Bill Wiggin.
Thank you. I am most grateful. I will keep my comments fairly brief. I was very happy enjoying the debate up until the Honourable Lady poked the bear, so to speak. Can I also just say how nice it was to hear from the former leader of the Labour Party, and we'd like to hear more from him more frequently. Because like him, I am very, very sensitive about racism, and I spoke out against this bill because I fundamentally believed that it was a neo-colonial attempt to control conservation management programmes of African democratic countries. I know that not one of us here today is a racist or has that really nasty streak of wanting to judge people by the colour of their skin. But we have to be desperately careful that we don't signal that we know best to countries that are emerging, and representatives from Angola, Botswana, Namibia and Zambia who are involved with the conservation activities in what's called CASA, the Kavango-Zambezi Trans-Frontier Conservation Africa, commented, what right do they have to impose restrictions that will damage our wildlife and people? Now, the UK government supports CASA through funding, and yet ethical hunting is part of the ambitious 5 African nation conservation endeavour to provide habitat and connectivity for wildlife across borders in an area of over 110 million acres, which is double the size of the United Kingdom. And therefore this bill does have a contradictory effect on our policy towards supporting African conservation efforts. And that is why I'm really grateful to the government for accepting new clause 4. In the second reading of the bill, one of the members described the UK as a world leader in nature conservation. However, a global league table for efforts to conserve megafauna, or large animals, puts pro-hunting Botswana, Namibia and Tanzania first, second and third in the world, and in contrast the UK is 123rd. So it's really, really important that we get this right. I know that many honourable members who watch David Attenborough on television, David Attenborough recently described the UK as one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, and perhaps we should adopt a more humble approach to countries with far more impressive conservation records. Rather than insulting, we should be consulting Africans on this issue. And I'm really grateful to the government for recognising that. I'm also grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, who I know, like me, passionately cares about animals. And we just have to debate in this chamber the differences of our opinion to make sure that everybody comes on that journey to a better future for our children and our planet. Thank you.
Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm here today to support my honourable friend for Crawley's very important bill to ban United Kingdom imports of trophy hunting trophies. I should begin by declaring a personal interest in that this was a particular passion of our great friend, the late Sir David Ames. Yeah. I knew David for over 20 years in Parliament, although he was elected far earlier than me, on the 9th of June 1983, coincidentally, as I understand it, on the same day as my right honourable friend for Christchurch. I must confess to the House that I'm not an expert in this subject, but I do know that my late friend desperately wanted legislation of this type to pass. So I hope the House will simply understand my motive for being here today. It's very good to be supported in this task by his excellent successor, the Honourable Member for South and West, who is in her place beside me. Among those watching the debate on this crucial bill very closely will be members of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, led by its redoubtable founder, Mrs. Lorraine Platt, who has campaigned tirelessly on this issue, and indeed many others relating to animal welfare, for years. She was also a great friend of Sir David's, and I know that she and her organisation will also be wishing this bill well. It is almost as if she was with us here today. On the 2nd of October 2019, Sir David, in the Westminster Hall debate on trophy hunting imports, said this, I quote him, "I recognise there is no easy solution. 200,000 endangered animals are put at risk each year, which is an awful lot to deal with. It's so depressing that as soon as someone comes up with an idea to stop trophy hunters, these evil, wicked people get ahead of the game and find some way round the legislation." I don't mean to provoke my honourable friend for North Herefordshire, because he and I came into this place on the same day in 2001. But Sir David in 2019 went on to say, "I don't minimise the difficulty that the government face, but I simply cannot comprehend why anyone would pay up to $72,000 to travel across the world and shoot a beautiful animal. As I've said at Business Questions, I've seen numerous adverts for trophy hunting, with some companies even advertising price lists by trip length, by animal on offer, and by trophy fee. Such adverts should be completely banned from all platforms in the United Kingdom.
Hear, hear.
I hope in this deliberately brief contribution, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been able to make my point. David was cruelly taken from us in absolutely tragic circumstances. But his memory lives on. He was an absolutely amazing champion for animal welfare. And I hope it's not presumptuous. I'm honoured to stand here today, perhaps in lieu of him, supported by his worthy successor, to make the case for this vital bill. If he were here, he would thank my honourable friend and indeed the entire House for what they are about to do. So may I humbly say thank you as well.
Annifer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise also as the member of Southend West, not only to extend my congratulations to my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, for his brilliant leadership in bringing this important bill to its final stages in the House of Commons, but also to remember the late Sir David Amos's decades-long advocacy on this issue. And I thank my right honourable friend for Rayleigh and Whitford for his contribution and what he has also said about Sir David. I know that Sir David would have supported my colleague's bill. He would have been cheering him on at every stage of its passage, and it's been my huge honour to support this bill at every stage as well. Not just in Sir David's honour and legacy, but because this is the right thing to do. And in Sir David's place, I would just like to say that through this bill, we are asserting that these magnificent animals, elephants, lions, rhinos, leopards, etc., many of whom, of course, I give way.
Thank you. Sir David was very kind to me from the first day I came into Parliament, and he encouraged me to work on animal welfare matters. And it's very appropriate that Eduardo Concalves' latest book, Saving Sally, Trophy Hunter's Secret and Lies, is dedicated to the memory of Sir David.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the honourable member very much for that contribution, which I will pass on to Lady Amos and the family. These wonderful, magnificent animals, some of which are on the brink of extinction, are worth so much more than a mere trophy on the mantelpiece. Trophy hunting is a relic of the past. It has no place in modern Britain, and we are standing as one in this House to stand up against those who seek to destroy wildlife and instead assert our leading role as an advocate for wildlife protection.
Dean Russell.
Deputy Speaker, and I'll be very, very brief. I know many members would have loved to have spoken in this debate today. I just wanted to pay tribute to the honourable member from Crawley for this today, but also to those members from North Herefordshire and Christchurch for doing something which has enabled this incredibly important bill to safeguard animals to go through. My very brief point is that we've seen an outpouring across the nation for this bill. We've seen support in the Chamber from all members. We've seen support from the government and ultimately from the general public. I just want to pay tribute to all of those and thank them for that. And like myself, I'm sure many members here today have cancelled constituency events to be here to support the bill. So I support it wholeheartedly and thank the House for all of their support for it too. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Alex Solly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a real pleasure to be able to stand up and speak so quickly in this debate. I'm not sure we quite thought we were going to get here this quickly, but I'm so pleased that we are. The Labour Party is strongly committed to a ban on hunting trophy imports, reflected by the number of colleagues here on a Friday, on all sides of the House, in fact. It was a manifesto commitment of ours at the last election. I'm therefore delighted to say that we shall be supporting this bill today. I would like to start by paying tribute to the late Labour MP for Waveney, Bob Blizzard, who's one of the founders of the campaign to ban trophy hunting, and this bill is part of his legacy. I would like to thank his partner Jane Evans and friend Eduardo Gonçalves, who've worked tirelessly on the campaign, of in particular help to me. I also want to echo members across the House, actually, in their tribute to Sir David Amess and his work on this matter. Like the Honourable Member for Crawley and people across the country, I was shocked and horrified at the killing of Cecil the lion by an American trophy hunter in 2015. I was horrified at the needlessly cruel manner in which Cecil died. He'd been left to drown in his own lung blood simply because the hunter wanted to win a special prize for shooting a lion with a bow and arrow. However, I was even more shocked and horrified to learn that since 2015, British trophy hunters have brought back more than 100 trophies of lions from Africa into the UK. Indeed, what British hunters are doing is arguably worse than what Cecil suffered, because he lived in the wild in Zimbabwe and was 13 when he was killed. Some British trophy hunters, on the other hand, fly to Africa where they shoot tame lions, have been hand-reared since they were born merely to become a hunter's trophy. But it turns out the lions aren't the only African animals that British hunters are shooting. They're shooting trophies of many other threatened species in Africa and around the world. And all of this has happened since 2015, the year when the world supposedly woke up to the horror of trophy hunting, the year when we all thought the killing of Cecil would bring us to our senses and put an end to this horror story once and for all. How wrong we were. We consider ourselves a nation of animal lovers, and rightly so. However, the things that British trophy hunters do should shame us all. Here are the prizes that just one British trophy hunter has won from Safari Club International. The Hunting Achievement Diamond Award for shooting animals from 125 different species. The Animals of Africa Gold Award for shooting at least 61 different African animals. The Global Hunting Gold Award for shooting 50 different animals on 5 different continents. The British hunter in question has gone to win over 30 more of these awards. Safari Club International, which handed out these prizes, a branch here in Britain, has been actively working to undermine and block the bill that we are considering today. They spent over £1 million on a disinformation campaign. I know other members have mentioned this already. Investigation by the Washington Post revealed it to be the work of an ally of Donald Trump, who's really set up a number of fake news groups to promote extreme right-wing causes and tried to create an AstroTurf campaign. Africans are as shocked and horrified at trophy hunting as we are. They are vehemently opposed to people jetting in from around the world to wipe out their wildlife and natural heritage for so-called sport. There was a very recent poll in South Africa, the hub of the African trophy hunting industry, showed that even there, fully 68% of people are against trophy hunting. Many of us, including myself, recently received a letter from the former President of Botswana, Seretse Ian Khama. He banned all trophy hunting in his country. He tells us how banning trophy hunting not only benefited threatened species such as elephant. Botswana is now home to 1/3 of all Africa's elephants. It also brought prosperity to local communities, creating more jobs and opportunities for local people, and improving living conditions by investing in photo safaris instead. The example of Kenya, which banned trophy hunting in the 1970s, is one that should be applauded and encouraged. While lion, elephant and rhino populations are falling throughout much of Africa, their numbers are all increasing in Kenya. And it is of economic benefit to those people as well. We can just compare the conditions of the Kenyan Maasai with those of Tanzania next door, where trophy hunting is still legal, which includes 20,000 Tanzanian Maasai being homeless due to land clearance. It is time to act. We can say that it's wrong for British people to kill animals for pleasure and mementos. We can set an example. Writer and poet Benjamin Zephaniah perhaps put it best when he says, "We human beings have a responsibility to look after this planet and its animals. We need to put trophy hunting in the dustbin of history, along with slave trade, female infanticide and witch hunting." It's a pleasure to do so.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and welcome the passage of this bill, not least because I won't have to move my own bill on next Friday. But is there a danger that we might be slightly complacent, given how far advanced we are in the parliamentary calendar, that this bill will pass with overwhelming support in this House, but the question is whether some of those elements that he's been describing may try and exercise delay in the other House? And has he sought any response from the Minister that the government will ensure that that doesn't happen, if necessary, creating extra parliamentary time in order to do so?
Yeah. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. I've had very fruitful discussions with the Minister, who I'm sure will respond to his point when she speaks. But I know that the Government are as keen as we are to see this trophy hunting bill on the statute books. This is not an issue of division between our parties. I'll just finish by finishing my quote from Benjamin Zephaniah, where he says, "Let's support the hunting trophies import prohibition bill." And so I'd like to conclude and hope that we can get this bill through shortly. Thank you.
Minister Trudy Harris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to all members here who are able to contribute to this debate. But let me start by thanking the members who sadly are not here and able to contribute to this debate. Yet they have been instrumental in enabling this day to happen. And in particular, I refer to our honourable friend, the member for Southend West, who was taken far too soon, but yet his contribution to this place was more than many of us will ever make. And I think the member for Rayleigh and Wickford set that out most eloquently. And also the member for Waverley, who cannot be here to debate such a subject that was so important to him. And actually, Madam Deputy Speaker, dare I say that Cecil, the lion, has not died in vain. It's an emotional day for all of us for very many reasons, but I'm really pleased to be here to support this bill once more. Of course, I need to pay tribute to my honourable member, my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, once again for his efforts in getting the bill to this nearly final stage, and in response to the member opposite who raised his concern, and I can't say it's not my concern too. I want this bill, and I know members in here today want this bill to pass through the other place as well. And I'm grateful actually for the meeting I had this morning with my friends opposite, the members for Oldham West and Royton, and also for Leeds North, in discussing just how that might be possible, because it is of such significance to all parties, I believe, across this House. Briefly, I will.
Can I thank the Minister for giving way? And it looks as though we've got more time in the parliamentary calendar running up to the autumn. But can the government send a very clear message to any who might be tempted to cause disruption and delay in the other place, which for those listening is how we refer to the House of Lords, and in order to ensure that there is sufficient parliamentary time to make sure that this measure goes through in this Parliament?
Yeah. He invites me to make promises which I am simply unable to guarantee, I'm afraid, in terms of timings. But I think it is worth me explaining that some of the concerns both raised here and which will be raised in the other place refer to how we will ensure we support the countries that will be affected by this ban on imports of trophies. And so I'd like to briefly set out the work that the government is undertaking. For example, £90 million for the Darwin Initiative and Darwin Plus to address biodiversity challenges and support local communities. £30 million for action on illegal wildlife trade, and the £100 million Biodiverse Landscapes Fund to work across 6 landscapes to protect and restore critical terrestrial ecosystems. I do recognise that some of the income from trophy hunting has contributed towards the protection of habitat and the prevention of poaching. But to bring the body parts of endangered species as clearly set out in CITES 1 and 2 lists is not the way forward. This government recognises that. This country recognises that. And I am absolutely clear that it is time for change. It is absolutely what the public expects. We know this because over 85% of the respondents to the consultation made it clear, though it will remain controversial, and that is why I was willing to accept new clause 4 to set up that advisory board to the government as requested by my honourable friend, and also to respect the work that CITES does internationally, which is why we were willing to accept the Amendment 1, by my honourable friend from Northamptonshire. I will give way. Of course I'll give way tonight.
I think the Honourable Lady makes a very important point. And further to the intervention earlier about the support there is for this, cross-party support, members here from both sides of the houses, all of us wanting this to proceed well at the other place. Does she agree with me that now this concession has been made, a generous concession I might add, to curtail significantly the regulation-making powers in Clause 2, that there is really nothing for their lordships to object to? Normally they object to so-called Henry VIII powers. Those have been completely removed, and that it should therefore be possible to expedite the process of this bill at the other place.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct, and it is absolutely the reason why we have accepted this amendment, because we want this bill to progress not just in the Commons but also in the Lords as well. And I would just like to correct, I was referring to my member for North Northamptonshire earlier, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker. What I actually meant to say was North Herefordshire. So to make some further progress, the import ban will cover all species listed on Annex A and B of our wildlife trade regulations, broadly aligned with Appendix 1 and 2 of CITES. And this extends to around 6,000 species, including those mentioned in this House. I would like to take the opportunity to recognise again the concerns that have been raised about Northern Ireland and the risk that my honourable friend referred to about Northern Ireland somehow becoming a backdoor. The member for East Antrim queried how we would make progress and clearly set out that he very much wants to be part of the UK. But let me reassure the House that we will do everything we possibly can to ensure that this is not the case, that Northern Ireland will not be a backdoor for so-called trophies from endangered species to enter Scotland, England or Wales. It will not be a stepping stone for imports to Great Britain. In committee, we discussed the workings of the bill and how it operates alongside the Northern Ireland Protocol and the UK internal market, and since then, the government has published the Windsor Framework. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I hope that I made it clear that it's not, my concern is not only that Northern Ireland could become a backdoor. That is a concern. But also that Northern Ireland will be exempt from this legislation so that people who engage in trophy hunting can operate freely in Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol doesn't stop it. The Windsor Framework doesn't stop it. Can the Minister give us an assurance that the government will take action to stop imports coming into Northern Ireland, full stop, just as it would be coming into the ban from the rest of the United Kingdom?
I would also like to put on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, our current controls on imports will continue to apply to Northern Ireland. Under the current CITES controls, in line with the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework, we will continue to scrutinise import permit applications carefully, making sure that they're not going to be moved onwards, and movements of hunting trophies from Northern Ireland to Great Britain will be subject to the import ban unless they are qualifying Northern Ireland goods in line with the UK Internal Market Act. But we will continue to review this and absolutely continue to work with the Honourable Gentleman as we make progress. I will give way.
Thank the Minister for giving way. And she says that the government will seek to do this through using the CITES legislation, etc. If that were the case, then of course there's no need for this bill. This bill is required because there is additional action needed to stop people going and cruelly hunting down animals in other parts of the world and bringing them back as trophies to the United Kingdom. What I want to know is, how does she intend to ensure that Northern Ireland trophy hunters do not have licence which they don't have in other parts of the United Kingdom?
My honourable friend does make a convincing point, but it should be recognised that this is a Brexit opportunity. We wouldn't be able to make this progress across Great Britain if we were still within the European Union. It is not ideal. I'll be the first person to state that quite clearly. We want to make further progress. We will, I'm sure, make further progress. and I will continue to meet, and I know that my officials will be meeting with those in Northern Ireland as well. In terms of... I will be away.
I'm most grateful. But does she accept that apparently in the Netherlands, despite them being within the European Union, they have imposed a complete ban on trophy imports? If they can do it in the Netherlands, why can't it be done in respect of Northern Ireland?
Madam Deputy Speaker, you will excuse me from being drawn into this wider argument. Getting back to the crux of this debate, since the Bills Committee, we've published the Environmental Improvement Plan, setting out our goal in the UK and across our country to see thriving plants and wildlife, and how we're going to achieve this here. The UK is supporting other countries to take action, working together with a shared commitment to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, as we agreed at the UN Nature Summit COP15 in Montreal last year. I know there are a great many other bills that we want to get through today. So in closing, I must again thank and commend my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, for his relentless determination, and members across the House. In particular, I want to thank the member for Neath, who I have met with. I know she feels passionately about this subject, and I was pleased to work with her. My honourable friends on the front bench, who have worked very collegiately to make sure that we pass this bill in this House, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I'm pleased that members have contributed, not just today, but previously, and we are sending a very strong message to the rest of the world that in this country, where we can, we are demonstrating our support for endangered species as set out by CITES across the world, and we do not accept their body parts being used as so-called trophies to be brought back into this country.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.